safety over immediate victory. By applying patience, acknowledging emotion first, and framing differences as shared exploration rather than confrontation, the dialogue becomes a tool for influence rather than conflict. This approach preserves relationships, opens minds, and allows for the quiet integration of ideas. Over time, these practices create a rhythm where disagreements no longer escalate and influence grows without force. In this way, patience, empathy, and understanding become the instruments of true conversational power, guiding interactions toward insight while safeguarding dignity and respect. Imagine two colleagues caught in a heated discussion over strategy. One insists the plan is too risky. The other argues that it is necessary. The voices rise, interruptions occur, and the air thickens with frustration. This is a familiar scene in offices, families, and even among friends, yet a single calm question can reset everything. Let's step back for a second. What outcome are we both trying to achieve? The focus moves away from ego and toward purpose. The conversation now revolves around results, not superiority. Defensive walls begin to lower because the discussion is no longer about who is right. It is about what works best. The dynamic changes from confrontation to collaboration, and what initially seemed adversarial becomes a shared exploration. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." When perspective shifts, the argument often loses its force without a single point being conceded. Using silence effectively requires patience and awareness. It is not avoidance, and it is not submission. It is the deliberate choice to let the emotional current settle before introducing thought or guidance. In this space, insight becomes possible. The conversation is no longer dictated by reactive impulses, but by conscious intention. This practice is particularly valuable when dealing with people whose pride or emotional investment is high. Rather than attempting to overpower them with reason or argument, you allow reflection to occur, giving their mind time to encounter their own inconsistencies or unexamined motives. Often, the pressure to respond immediately is a product of anticipation rather than necessity. Silence lets reality catch up with expectation. When reframing and silence are combined, the effect is magnified. A well-timed question can redirect focus, while a pause can diffuse tension long enough for rational thought to emerge. The person across from you is no longer trapped in the emotional loop that drives most conflicts. They begin to think instead of react, to consider instead of oppose. This is the essence of influence without force. It is not about dominating the conversation or proving a point. It is about creating conditions where insight, understanding, and cooperation can flourish naturally. Observing not only your own impulses, but the emotional rhythms of the discussion allows you to act with clarity and restraint, shaping the dialogue rather than being shaped by it. Ultimately, mastery in dialogue is achieved not through dominance, but through subtle guidance. Reframing discussions and applying silence create a rhythm where arguments lose momentum and understanding grows. Defensive walls fall naturally when focus is on shared objectives rather than personal victory. People begin to listen, not out of obligation, but because the environment you cultivate encourages thought over reaction. The conversation becomes a space for reflection and clarity, not for prideful assertion. Each disagreement becomes an opportunity to recognize the currents of ego, emotion, and perception, to adjust your own responses, and to guide the dialogue toward resolution. By mastering the art of reframing and the power of silence, influence is exercised without confrontation, and interactions shift from conflict to cooperation, quietly and profoundly. Silence is far more powerful than most people give it credit for, yet it is often deeply misunderstood. Many believe that remaining quiet makes them appear weak, as if failing to respond immediately is the same as conceding defeat. The truth is the opposite. Calm silence can carry more authority than 100 arguments. The moment someone provokes you and you respond instantly, you have already surrendered control. Their words have pushed a button inside you, and your reaction confirms it. But when you pause, when you allow that brief interval to stretch just a little longer, the dynamic changes entirely. The energy in the room shifts. The conversation loses its frantic rhythm. The other person, faced with your restraint, often begins filling the space themselves. They clarify their own words, soften their tone, and sometimes even reconsider the assumptions behind what they said. It is in this space that influence quietly emerges, without a single raised voice or pointed retort. Silence interrupts the cycle of conflict because it forces time into the exchange. When both parties are rushing to assert themselves, logic is drowned out by emotion, and conversations spiral into defensiveness. By simply pausing, you create a gap where reasoning can enter, where reflection can occur, and where composure can guide the next step. Marcus Aurelius once said, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" In silence, you prevent the immediate flare of anger from taking over, and in doing so, you reduce the likelihood that the conversation will leave lasting damage. The person who learns to remain quiet in the face of provocation gains a subtle authority. They are no longer pushed around by circumstance or emotion. Instead, they shape the exchange through restraint and attention. Silence is not emptiness, it is presence, it is observation, and it is a form of unspoken power that few ever use deliberately. Yet silence is not simply about waiting. It is an active practice that requires awareness and intentionality. Stoics understood this deeply. They cultivated the ability to pause before reacting, to allow reason to emerge after the initial surge of emotion. Epictetus once said, "There is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will." In conversation, silence becomes the vehicle for this principle. You focus not on controlling what the other person says, but on regulating your own responses. You maintain equilibrium while observing the interplay of words, tone, and subtle emotional cues. This deliberate pause transforms what could have been a reactive exchange into a measured dialogue. The room grows quieter, and the conversation often follows, because your calm has interrupted the usual rhythm of escalation. Even with mastery of silence, it is important to recognize that not every situation is resolvable. Some conflicts persist, no matter how disciplined or patient you are. Others will not shift because the other person is invested in defending an idea or identity at any cost. Accepting that some arguments are unwinnable is a cornerstone of calm influence. It is a recognition that control is not in forcing agreement, but in managing your own state of mind. You may not convince everyone, and you may not resolve every dispute, but you can protect your composure, maintain your dignity, and preserve your energy. The act of remaining silent in these moments is not surrender. It is choosing wisely where to invest your attention and influence. Silence, practiced consistently, subtly changes the landscape of every relationship and interaction. When others realize that their provocations no longer elicit immediate reactions, they begin to approach conversations differently. They pause, reconsider, and often moderate their tone without any overt instruction. The power of this approach lies not in domination, but in the quiet establishment of boundaries. It signals that you are grounded, that your equilibrium cannot be easily disturbed, and that emotional manipulation or rash challenges will no longer dictate your behavior. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." Silence is a form of bravery in social interaction, a freedom from the tyranny of immediate impulse, and a means to exert control without aggression. This approach also has a profound impact on your own mental state. Reacting instantly keeps you trapped in cycles of emotion, frustration, anger, and resentment long after the conversation ends. By embracing silence, you create space for reflection, preventing escalation both in the moment and afterward. The practice strengthens emotional resilience, allowing you to choose responses that align with your principles rather than with transient feelings. It is a disciplined pause that enhances clarity, focus, and strategic thinking. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." In conversation, silence is a tool for self-knowledge, allowing you to notice triggers, recognize patterns, and respond deliberately rather than reactively. Finally, the subtle power of silence extends beyond immediate conflicts. It influences how people perceive you over time. Those who respond with calm restraint are not seen as timid or weak. They are seen as deliberate, measured, and reliable. Their words carry weight, not because of volume, but because of timing and precision. They cultivate an aura of stability that reshapes interactions before they even begin. The strategic use of silence, combined with careful observation and thoughtful engagement, allows you to navigate conversations with far greater control. It teaches patience, preserves relationships, and creates influence without confrontation. Plato once said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say, fools because they have to say something." In mastering the art of silence, you join those who speak with intention and act with presence, guiding discussions not through force, but through the quiet authority of restraint and understanding. Some people are not actually looking for understanding. They are looking for opposition. They are driven by the need to assert themselves, to challenge, to control the rhythm of the conversation rather than to engage in exploration. You've likely encountered someone like this. No matter how carefully you phrase your thoughts, how calmly you explain, or how patient you remain, they push back. Every discussion turns into a debate. Every disagreement becomes a performance. It is exhausting because you cannot win by logic alone. Trying to convince them can feel like talking to a wall, and the more effort you invest, the more resistance seems to arise. It is in these moments that the usual rules of conversation no longer apply. The person you are engaging with has already decided that disagreement is more important than insight. Reacting to them with your usual tactics only feeds the cycle, reinforcing tension and drawing you into unnecessary conflict. The solution, counterintuitive as it may seem, is to withdraw your energy, not out of fear, not out of submission, but as a deliberate choice to preserve your calm and focus. You do not need to correct every misunderstanding. You do not need to explain every decision. You do not need to justify your life choices to someone who has already made up their mind. Calm detachment becomes the most potent form of influence. When you acknowledge another person's perspective politely and then choose not to engage further in proving yourself, you maintain control of your mind while releasing the tension that drives conflict. Seneca once said, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." In this case, the imagination of conflict, the anticipation of argument, is more exhausting than the reality of the exchange. By stepping back, you remove yourself from the drama without losing integrity. The benefits of this approach are subtle but profound. When you stop investing energy in battles that cannot be won, something shifts. Your conversations become quieter. Others may continue to push, but their attempts are less effective because you are no longer reacting impulsively. The dynamic changes from confrontation to observation. You notice patterns in how people attempt to provoke, and you learn where your own triggers lie. Calm detachment does not mean you stop caring or stop engaging entirely. It means you choose where engagement is meaningful. Time, attention, and emotional energy are finite resources. Allocating them wisely allows you to focus on discussions that matter, decisions that matter, and relationships that matter. In effect, the less you expend on unnecessary conflict, the stronger your influence becomes. As this practice develops, people begin to notice. They notice that your words carry weight not because of volume or intensity, but because of measured intention. They notice that attempts to provoke you no longer succeed in eliciting a reaction. You become difficult to manipulate, difficult to anger, and difficult to distract. This is a quiet authority, not one imposed by dominance, but earned through composure. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In this context, making the darkness conscious means recognizing the emotional currents, the pride-driven provocations, and the triggers that others attempt to exploit. Once you see them clearly, you no longer need to fight them. You respond with awareness, not reflex, and in doing so, the other person's ability to control the conversation diminishes naturally. Withdrawing your energy is also a strategic investment in your own well-being. Engaging endlessly with people who thrive on opposition drains vitality, focus, and patience. It depletes mental resources that could be directed toward creation, problem-solving, and personal growth. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Here, the obstacle is not the other person's words themselves, but the impulse to react to them. By redirecting your attention, by refusing to give power to their provocation, you transform what could have been a drain into an opportunity. The energy saved can be used to influence situations where reasoning, patience, and dialogue can actually make a difference. The distinction between expendable conflict and meaningful engagement becomes clearer with practice. This approach does not require manipulation or deceit. It is rooted in presence, self-awareness, and understanding of human behavior. You are not ignoring the other person. You are recognizing the futility of certain confrontations and choosing to preserve energy and clarity. It is a form of mastery over oneself, not over others. The person who practices this becomes increasingly resilient. They are able to navigate conflicts calmly, even when provoked, and can maintain focus on meaningful objectives rather than being drawn into unnecessary battles. Over time, as this discipline is integrated into daily interactions, the effect compounds. People approach conversations with you differently. They notice a steadiness that is rare, a quiet presence that does not react to every provocation. You do not need to argue to be respected. You do not need to escalate to be heard. Your calmness shapes the environment and shifts the dynamics of dialogue naturally. By withdrawing energy strategically, you preserve not only your peace of mind, but also your ability to act with intention. Observing the provocations of others and choosing where to invest your energy becomes a tool for self-knowledge, influence, and effective communication. Over time, these choices create a presence that is both unshakable and quietly compelling, allowing you to navigate social interactions with a strength that does not need to raise its voice. Over time, this discipline begins to shape the way people perceive you in ways that are subtle yet profound. When someone rarely engages in arguments, when they do speak, it is heard more carefully, more thoughtfully. Words carry weight not because of volume, but because of consistency and calm authority. When you maintain composure under pressure, your presence itself begins to stabilize the environment around you. People instinctively adjust to your steadiness, even if they do not consciously recognize it. Carl Jung once said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order." By cultivating calm amidst the chaos of conflict, you become a living example of that hidden order. Conversations that once spiraled into tension now take on a different rhythm, one shaped by observation, reflection, and quiet influence. As this pattern continues, the effect extends beyond individual conversations. People begin to seek your perspective instead of confrontation. They bring problems to you rather than arguments, questions instead of disputes. This is the subtle authority earned through restraint, a type of influence that does not demand attention, but commands it naturally. Understanding your own reactions, recognizing when to step back, and consistently choosing calm over agitation builds a reputation that others intuitively trust. They see that you are not easily manipulated, not easily drawn into unnecessary battles, and that your focus remains on solutions rather than proving a point. This quiet competence encourages cooperation and mutual respect in ways that loud argumentation never can. The discipline of choosing peace over victory also enhances emotional clarity. When you refuse to react impulsively, you gain time to consider what is truly important, what merits engagement, and what can be allowed to pass without consequence. Decisions are made with intention rather than reaction. Conflicts are assessed for their significance rather than their emotional charge. This clarity reduces stress, conserves energy, and prevents the entanglement that so often accompanies reactive argumentation. By intentionally stepping back from unnecessary arguments, you prevent imagined conflicts from dictating your emotional state, preserving mental and emotional resources for situations where deliberate action is meaningful and productive. As your steadiness becomes recognized, people begin to approach you differently. They speak more cautiously, consider your perspective more openly, and are more likely to collaborate than to compete. The environment you create becomes calmer, more constructive, and less prone to conflict. Relationships gradually improve not through persuasion or force, but through the consistent demonstration of patience, restraint, and rational composure. Observing interactions without reacting impulsively provides insight not only into the motivations of others, but into your own patterns, allowing growth and refinement in how you engage with the world. The discipline of calmness becomes a mirror for self-awareness, creating influence without aggression and change without confrontation. The ultimate effect of this practice is transformative. You become a stabilizing force, someone whose presence encourages reflection, measured dialogue, and thoughtful problem-solving. People instinctively know that attempts to provoke or control will not succeed, and they adjust accordingly. The energy that once fueled endless arguments is redirected toward productive exchanges, toward shared objectives, and toward relationships built on respect and trust. Choosing peace over victory is not a sign of weakness. It is the hallmark of strength. It requires observation, self-control, and the willingness to prioritize long-term stability over short-term triumph. Each moment of restraint reinforces the pattern, and the cumulative effect is profound. You are not defensive. You are not reactive. You are steady. Your presence becomes a quiet authority, a stabilizing factor in interactions that might otherwise have spiraled into conflict. The discipline shapes not only conversations, but your reputation, relationships, and inner life. The world responds not to force or aggression, but to calm, reasoned influence. And in mastering this discipline, you harness a power that many overlook, yet few ever achieve. This is the subtle art of remaining grounded, of choosing composure, and of cultivating influence through serenity and deliberate presence. Mastering the art of calm, of choosing peace over victory, is not about avoiding life, it's about shaping it. When you respond with steadiness instead of reaction, you protect your mind, preserve your energy, and quietly influence the world around you. Every conversation becomes an opportunity for understanding, every challenge a chance to practice restraint, and every moment of calm builds the foundation of a stronger, wiser self. If you let these principles take root, you'll notice something extraordinary. People listen more, resist less, and your life begins to move with a rhythm you control, not one dictated by chaos or conflict. Take a moment now and watch one of the videos on your screen to continue strengthening this practice. And thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal, where growth, clarity, and quiet power are cultivated every day.